Redditors, do you have psycho neighbors and what makes them crazy? I'm a young guy with a nighttime job living in an area of town that has gotten pretty sketchy over the past decade or so. The police are here at least once a month to sort out some violent or drug-related crime. I'm a very routine-focused person, so for the past 8 years, before going to work at 1:30 a.m., I always take my dog out for a walk around 1 a.m. In the fall of last year, I went for the routine dog walk one misty night at 1 a.m. like usual. I made a right turn after exiting the gate, and just as I passed the corner of my apartment building, I noticed a fuzzy shape on the ground just outside the gate of the neighboring building. I stopped in my tracks and took in what I was looking at. I determined it was just a cat lying on its side on the pavement. I thought this was odd, but since I knew my dog would most certainly bark at it and wake up the entire neighborhood, I chose to turn around and take a different route for the walk than usual. For the rest of this walk, I was reflecting on that cat. There was something very off about the cat just lying relaxed on the ground in the middle of the night with no people around. Once my walk had looped me back to my gate, I decided to turn the corner again and see if the cat was still there. Mind you, a full 15 minutes had gone by at this point. Sure enough, it was still there. Same position and everything. Now I thought this scene was even more odd. I took my dog up to the apartment, put my work clothes on, grabbed my car keys, and headed out. As I exited the elevator, the image of the relaxed cat lying outside was still in the back of my mind, perplexing me. Instead of going into the underground garage, I decided to instead go out of the main gate one last time to check if the cat was still there. I exited, turned the corner, and once again, the cat was still lying there. Since my dog wasn't with me this time, I just approached it this time to check if the cat was okay. When I got to it and looked down, I stared at it for a good long while. The cat wasn't breathing at all, it was dead, no question about it. I had my suspicions this might have been the case, so I wasn't entirely shocked, but something was still so off about it. A cat wouldn't just lay down in the middle of a paved sidewalk to die of natural causes, I thought. There was no noticeable blood on or around it, so I began thinking the cat might have jumped from one of the balconies. Just as that thought hit me, a raspy voice spoke to me from above. Yup. There she is. The voice said in a very matter-of-fact type of tone. I got spooked and quickly glanced up. Through the mist, I saw a middle-aged woman on the 5th floor balcony leaning over the railing, looking down at me with a lit cigarette in her hand. When our eyes met, a cold shiver shot through the top of my scalp all the way down to my toes in an instant. I may have misinterpreted her facial expression due to the fog, but I could swear she was smiling when our eyes met. Without responding, I immediately turned and quickly walked over to my gate. As I walked, I could hear her laughing. I practically sprinted to my car in the garage. Once I sat down inside, I considered whether I should call the police or not, as every aspect of what I had just witnessed gave me the impression that this neighbor of mine had unalived the cat. I dialed the number but decided not to, as they might want me to stick around for questioning, which might get me late to work. So I went on with my night as usual, doing my best to forget about the incident for now. When I got home later, the cat wasn't there anymore. About a week later, I walked past a neighbor living in the same building as me. We had some usual neighborly small talk, but she interrupted herself to ask me whether I had heard about what happened in the other building last week. I said I didn't. She told me that a woman on the 5th floor had thrown her cat down from the balcony in a rage because it peed on the living room carpet. The cat had apparently not died immediately, but all its legs were broken from the initial impact of the concrete pavement. Police were called around 5 a.m. when another dog walker saw the cat. The woman had still been out on the balcony by this point, talking to the guy while he called the police. I believe the woman's other cats were taken away from her, and she was fined a few $1,000s. She still lives there, and I sometimes see her leaning on the balcony railing when I'm walking my dog. Date: I found out my girlfriend talks bad about me after I snooped through her phone. I did some reflection and realized that her tone didn't really seem to be much meaner than the jokes she usually makes about people. The ones about me in particular I realized were actually hilarious, like I kept cracking up about the LinkedIn one. And they were honestly entirely accurate too. What I was honestly really bothered about was that I was included, and I pretty much wanted to know if she actually liked me or was just settling. I knew about her thought phase before, so I wasn't that upset about it either, and I felt like it wasn't my place to say anything about that. I decided that I needed to confront her because the situation was upsetting me a lot. I decided that I was going to A, ask her about the 6/10 rating because it honestly hurt my pride a lot, ha ha ha. B, ask her about the sad sack of poop comment because that was the one that seemed meanest. And C, ask her in general if she actually wanted to be with me. It would also have been a deal breaker if she kept updating the document with stuff about me after we'd started dating, or if she had any really unacceptable stuff on people, like revenge porn. Unlike what a lot of people said, I did not think she was going to Ted Bundy me while I slept. I've seen her in plenty of high-stress situations and I have never thought she was going to commit homicide, and I'm also not that afraid of a 5 feet 3 inches girl. I also didn't think it was right to not say anything, as I knew it was going to continue bothering me. That said, I did realize that I wanted to F with her a bit. I've never met anyone who takes it better than her, like any time I've seen people making jokes about her she takes it very well and enjoys it, so I didn't think it would upset her too much. The day after I made my post, we didn't see each other until dinner. I'd been a bit weird all day over text but she didn't think much of it and just asked me if I was okay. I'd devised my plan at this point, so over dinner I dropped that I was considering buying a LinkedIn Plus subscription for networking. She gave me a side eye like I had never seen before and asked me why on earth I would do that. I saw her later texting her group chat. I didn't see what, but I was pretty sure it was about that. That night, we were trying out something new in the bedroom, and as we were cuddling after, I asked her if she was open to something when she was on her period. She asked me what, and I asked if I could take her tampon out with my teeth, as I'd seen a lot on TikTok about it. She looked like she was actually going to scream but held it in and said sure. The next day she seemed suspicious, so I decided to really finish it off. She went to work and I had the day off, so I decided to really go to town on my Instagram story. Some of you thought that the Instagram story comment meant I posted pics of myself on there, but I actually just post a lot of aesthetic pictures that I do spend a lot of time taking. I think that comment in her doc was probably because on our first date I took some pics for my Instagram story, and she said something like, oh yeah, I like those, and I said, hey, they're not really good enough, and she laughed at me even at the time. So anyways, that day I roamed around the city to all my favorite aesthetic spots and posted probably 10 or so stories, which I imagine annoyed everyone a lot. She slid up on them, and by the 10th one she said, damn, you're really going to effing town on these today. So I replied something like, Lamao, yeah, it gets me in the mood, you know, to which she replied with the ha emoji. At this point I think she'd caught on, and I had honestly been acting a bit off too because my pride was still a little bruised, and I was also regretting having snooped. That night, she came to my place with my favorite dinner and subtly, for her, asked me if there was anything I wanted to talk about. At this point I laid it out for her, and I prefaced it with apologizing for snooping, but that the title of the document had caught my eye. She looked absolutely mortified but was also laughing and kept apologizing. I laid out my 3 concerns to her, and she told me that A, the 6/10 was truthful at the time, but she did like me a lot, as evidenced by dating me. B, the sad sack of poop comment was about all the people she knew who only hopped around and never had real relationships, and that sleeping with me made her realize that she would much prefer to be in a relationship with someone like me, but that she thought she'd squandered her chances by hooking up with me instead. And that C, yes, obviously she loved and liked and respected me a lot. She also invited me to look through the folder freely, and that she wasn't ashamed of anything in there, just embarrassed that I'd seen those comments about myself. I checked and there was nothing in there about me since we'd started dating. The only stuff was from when we'd hooked up. She also pointed out a document that I hadn't looked at before. It was in a folder titled Rankings, and each girl had a doc in there. She only let me look at hers, but it was basically a ranking of every person she'd ever been involved with in any way. It was a long document, with comments. I was first, and where for everyone else there was a list of pros and cons, mine just said love him 4x. Also, it seemed like they would all comment on each other's to argue about the ranking, like some of them had things like no he was sexy, move him up, but mine just had comments from all the girls pretty much affirming the choice and praising me. So I was pretty satisfied with what I saw, and it also seems like they only update it now with stories, gossip, or pictures and no insults or anything else like that. My girlfriend was overall mortified and was extremely apologetic, and I was also apologetic about looking through it, and told her she could look through anything I owned if she wanted, but she turned me down. She wasn't upset about the snooping at all, and said that she had nothing to hide and that she would have done the same thing if she'd seen a folder as artfully and intriguingly named as theirs. So yeah, we are all good. My neighbor's dog's KLLS coworker's cat, coworker ruins their Christmas. I used to work with a receptionist in a vet clinic named Margot. Margot was and still is a very sweet 65-year-old woman who had been at this practice since it was opened, some 40 years ago. She always had a smile, a joke, compliments and baked goods for your birthday. She never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She was seriously one of the coolest people I had ever worked with, and she basically knew everyone, from our regular clients to our mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing about Margot, and this was not her fault, was that she and her family lived next to one of the trashiest, nastiest families I had ever met that had 2 even nastier pit bulls. I'm talking nastier than poop that had been hoarded by dung beetles for years nasty. And these dogs were constantly escaping and terrorizing the neighborhood, even trying to get into her house. Margot had asked them more than once to please keep the dogs contained, especially since she had an elderly, fat cat named Garfield and these pits had attacked smaller animals before. The family basically told her to rot in hell, that they knew what they were doing, how dare she accuse the breed, yada yada, basically blowing her off. Margot knew there had been reports filed against my neighbors but nothing had ever been done about it really. So she made sure to keep Garfield in the house to keep him safe and was very careful not to let him out. If you had been paying attention up until this point, you'll notice I'm using the word was and had regarding old Garfield. And it was as awful as you think. 3 weeks before Christmas, Margot had the day off and was in the garage with Garfield fiddling with some Christmas decorations. Unbeknownst to her, the pits next door got out and broke through the bottom of her garage door. They went right for Garfield before she could blink and started to tear the cat apart. Margot screamed for help, and it was only when her son and husband came out with a baseball bat that they were able to free Garfield from the jaws of these dogs. I was working this day and will never forget when she came in, crying harder than I had ever seen anyone cry in my life, clutching a poor dying Garfield in her arms. Her husband had to hold her while we tried to bring Garfield back, but we couldn't do it. It would have taken a miracle of God and then some, and he passed away, a truly crap way to go in what should have been the golden years of his fat cat life. Margot sat there for a while with his mangled body, quietly crying for a while before she finally kissed whatever part of him was still intact and stood up. She told us all, I've got a job to do, take care of him, girls. And then left. We figured Margot would take a few days off to be with family and then continue on with life as normal. We figured wrong. Now when I say Margot knew everyone, I mean, everyone. Right after she left the hospital, Margot gathered herself up and went to the police with pictures of poor Garfield and told her story. The same police officers she had watched grow up over the last 20 years from rowdy middle schoolers she used to help babysit to the officers they were today. They were absolutely shocked to hear what had happened to their surrogate grandma and pushed her case to the front of the line. The case found itself before a judge whose daughter had gone to school with Margot's daughter. The judge granted an emergency, dangerous animal extraction warrant to her neighbors. Of course, there was a hearing. Within 2 weeks, which I gotta admit, was ridiculously fast. The neighbors tried to argue that their dogs weren't aggressive. They even went so far as to accuse Margot of having it out for their family and making it all up. But their argument trickled when the dozens of dangerous animal reports were presented and finally completely dried out when Margot presented the surveillance video her grandson had gotten showing the dogs coming into her property and attacking poor Garfield. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of her neighbor's dogs was granted. It was Christmas Eve when Margot heard a knock on her door. She opened it up to see the neighbors standing there, sobbing uncontrollably. They were begging her to stop animal control, that they had these dogs since they were puppies, how the kids would be devastated and it would ruin Christmas, and if she could find it in her heart to give the dogs another chance. Up until this moment, the neighbors had behaved abominably. They didn't offer to fix the garage. They never apologized for trying to slander her name in court. Hell, they didn't even pay for Garfield to be cremated. At no point had they even shown the slightest shred of remorse for what damage their dogs had done. And as the neighbors stood there, blubbering and whimpering about how this was going to ruin their Christmas, Margot looked them straight in the eye and told them, in her calmest voice, "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours." And shut the door in their face just as animal control pulled up onto the driveway. Margot was not surprised as she watched the dogs get hauled into the truck and taken away. After all, it was her idea for animal control to take the dogs on Christmas Eve, a perk from having known the AC officer supervisor for years. Margot even made sure the dogs were euthanized before the outside Christmas lights turned on that night. The family never received the remains, nor did they ever get a chance to bring another animal into their family, as the father proceeded to drunk drive into a telephone pole that same night, killing him instantly. Mom went off the deep end, so CPS picked up the kids by February. And ultimately, the house foreclosed in September. Despite how traumatic Garfield's death was, I'd like to think that if the neighbors had shown at least some regret, Margot might not have gone as far as she did. She was / is still the person to forgive and forget. Or maybe, she ultimately knew it had to be done, to push it to this point of no return before another family lost a member to these irresponsible neighbors. Either way, thank you Margot for making the world a little bit safer for the pets in the world. And rest in peace, Garfield. Hopefully I'll see you on the other side with your favorite orange sock and a can of tuna.